Everybody.
Well, hello to everybody.
And it became. Thank you for coming. Why are you here tonight?
Well, we lived through this.
Yes, of course we did. But we're gonna live through it again.
It's very, time in this country.
It absolutely was, and that's what I'm highlight. We're learning. I'm gonna take a chance to start. Is that okay? I'll be glad to get it. I'm sure there's Charlie and then
Right about that.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm Tom Richards. I spend, you might see me in the library, sometimes helping people at the information desk. And I also work with the Friends of the Library Board, and have kind of didn't say no when they asked me if I would take on developing programs. And so that's why Charlie's here today. Charlie and I have had some parallels in our career that I think he might know a little bit of. We both had an interest in aviation. Charlie got a lot farther with it than I do with my flight simulator. He had an interest in communication and public relations. I pursued that and went in different directions along the way. We both worked for electric utilities and managed, or at least helped customers with that through the process. And then we both got involved with municipal government. Charlie with several boards and committees, but ultimately with the Emmett County Board of County Commissioners, which he was head of for at least a year or two. And was it that long? I was in the room when we were leaning on you to say, we need someone on the Board of Commissioners. Do you remember that?
actually it was Bill Cohen who said
Yeah.
nobody was running, and so I said, fine.
Yeah, exactly. So we share some things. One of the things we don't share is in the late 60s and early 70s, when I was in high school, I had a draft number that was low enough to make me think I was going to have to go to Vietnam. And I was learning everything there was to know about the Coast Guard, because I thought that would be a lot safer until I learned that it was the Coast Guard going down some of the rivers being shot at in Vietnam. Charlie, instead of looking out and not being drafted for that, ended up serving in Vietnam, and that brings us to the science program. So, John,
Thank you. Thank you,
thank
Tom.
you very much.
When I was asked to run as a county commissioner, nobody was running. So and my background is public relations. I worked for Consumers Energy for many years and served in a school board member in various places. So I had a very sophisticated knowledge of campaigning. So when I ran for the county commission, I had a really clever campaign slogan, which was, vote for me, I'm the only one on the ballot. And it worked. So anyway, I served for 10 years in Emmett County, and I helped a couple of people in your county run successfully, and you've got, I think, a good board. So I was in the Army in 1969 and 70. I went back in January of this year. Oh, I'm sorry, that's right. Yeah, that's right. I went back in January of this year. I wanted to do this. I thought, I found a company that gave me a customized tour. It was just myself. I wasn't with a group. I had a guide in Hanoi and a driver, and then I flew to Hue, where I had a guide and a driver, and then I flew to Saigon, where I had a guide and a driver. So it was 3 days in Hanoi, 2 in Hue, and 3 in Saigon, and it was remarkable. And so I put together a program, which is what you're going to see tonight. So I will tell you that I had a great education in Sault Ste. Marie when I went to high school, because my junior year, I took typing. And it turned out in the 1960s, a guy who could type was unique. It was before computers. And that was my career in the Army, was Radar O'Reilly. I'm going to begin this with a short video, and then we're going to launch away. He was a wonderful man. Okay, so this is me. I haven't changed a bit, as you can tell. So why did I join the Army in 1968? I had just graduated from Michigan State University, and the war was on, and the draft was coming, but had not arrived yet. And I thought, I'll join the Army. Why would I do that? Well, it turned out it was kind of a family tradition. This is my mother. She was in nursing school at the Maslin Hospital in southeastern Ohio, studying for a pediatrics exam when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. The next day, this little shy lady at age 21 joined the Army. She went down to the Army recruiter the next day and said, I'm joining the Army. This is amazing. She was, I'd never seen any evidence of that in her whole life, except that she was determined. And so once she graduated from nursing school, she went into Army nurse training, was commissioned a second lieutenant, and went to England, where she served, and never told me a single story about what she did. Except I would say to her, Mom, what was it like? And she said, all I can say is these young soldiers never complained. She worked in an Army hospital in England where the soldiers had come back from Europe and took care of them. On the right is my father. He was the youngest hospital superintendent in the country at War Memorial Hospital in Sault Ste. Marie, and he was drafted. He ended up on a ship in the Pacific, which was sunk. He came back to the States, was given training, and was sent to run a small hospital in England. And what do you know? My mother was there and they were married. And so I joined the Army because that's something that my family did. And I gave it no particular thought. So I enlisted to be a helicopter pilot. I thought, boy, this would be great, because I was dating a girl whose father was a bomber pilot in World War II and in tractable pain ever since then. So it seemed logical to follow that kind of a path. So, but luckily when I was farsighted, even though I enlisted, they said, well, you've enlisted so you can pick your job, what we call the MOS, military occupational specialty, but we're not going to have you fly. So I was in the Army 3 hours and I was typing. Because I was the one guy who knew how to type. So in basic, I typed. Advanced training, I learned about Signal Corps stuff because I picked the Signal Corps. And then I went to Vietnam and I was there a couple hours, and pretty soon I was a clerk. And I spent 14 months as Radar O'Reilly. So we're going to talk about something called French Indochina. So what exactly is that? Well, the French in the 1800s had really taken over parts of the world, the Far East, which was Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. They were an imperial government, and they had cheap labor, and there were rubber plantations. And as a result, the Michelin Company was able to tap rubber and to make tires. And I was on one of those plantations at one point. Now, one of the important things to know is the Vietnamese hated them. I mean, if you have somebody from a different part of the world running your government for you, now they did commit their language to the written word, but the French were not well liked. So after the French come the Japanese during World War II, because they were invading a lot of countries for their natural resources. Well, the Vietnamese hated the Japanese as well. So 1946, after the end of the war, the Japanese are gone and the Vietnamese are happy as heck until the French come back. Vietnam at that time had 20 million people in a relatively poor country. Ho Chi Minh was a leader of the northern part of the country, and he regarded himself as a man of the people, and he never wore anything but very plain clothing, plain shoes, food that the people ate, and he was widely revered because of his approach to life. And he had been in Europe, he'd been in the United States. I don't know how many languages he spoke, but he was well educated in terms of the West. And he was really hoping that the United States would come in and help him get rid of the French. So, but why did we go to Vietnam? That's the big question. Well, it turns out there was, of course, the Red Scare and McCarthy era, but equal and most important comes Korea. And we were successful in World War II, vanquishing other countries, but we were really scared of the communists. And Korea then was northern and southern. In the north were leaders who were supported by China and Russia. And in the south was somebody that we thought we could work with, the leader of the southern part of Korea. But there was this conflict going back and forth. And so General MacArthur, who was a hero of World War II, comes to Korea and said, we're going to sort this out. We'll be home by Christmas. Well, it turns out the Chinese and the Russians came down in hordes. They were poorly trained, poorly equipped, poorly dressed, but there were just so many of them. So we spent 3 years there. And in putting this together, a friend of mine said, you really need to read this classic book about the Korean War, because Korea was a brutal war and we fought through winter. And essentially it was a stalemate, but it scared us because MacArthur goes to Korea, or at least he sends the troops to Korea. He doesn't spend much time in Korea himself, but it was essentially a standoff that hasn't changed today. So now we have a fellow named General Giap, and he's an ally of Ho Chi Minh. And he really hates the French. Why does he hate the French? Because the French treated the Vietnamese brutally. In fact, you've heard of John McCain being in the Hanoi Hilton. What we don't know is that the French built the Hanoi Hilton to torture and incarcerate Vietnamese political opponents. And what they did was they would put them on a flat surface that was tilted backwards and put their feet in shackles, but they would also shackle and torture their wives and their children. General Giap's wife died in the Hanoi Hilton. So there was just tremendous animosity toward the French. So comes 1954, and General Giap, with all of his troops and their commitment to get rid of the French, overrun the French at Dien Bien Phu, the famous battle of the Vietnamese against the French, and threw them out. So now we've got Ho Chi Minh and Giap in the north. And in the south, we have people that we think are not communists, and therefore maybe we should support them. And one of them was their leader, No Dinh Diem, who is the president of South Vietnam, who said, we're going to have elections across the country and we're going to elect people to lead this country. And President Eisenhower thought that was just great. Well, CM was one of the most corrupt people possible. He and his brother and his brother's wife, Madame New, were corrupt leaders in the country. The army was corrupt. The generals hated them. And we were backing this guy because he was not communist. 1963, we begin to see around the world protests against the Diem regime, which has been promising elections, but isn't going to do them. And so the monks that were up in Hue immolated themselves in Saigon. They tried it several times, but they didn't get much traction. So they finally developed what we now call a media strategy. And their seventh one was scheduled so that media could be there. And when this man, who was an elderly monk who was given quite a bit of drugs, and in that blue car was brought from Hue down to Saigon and then set fire, that made headlines around the world. Madame New was very disdainful. She said they can have all the barbecues they want, but I'm not impressed. Well, the problem is that the South Vietnamese did not like their leader. And the generals who reported to President Diem, with the approval of the Central Intelligence Agency, and when we were between ambassadors, because we had an ambassador over there, assassinated him. So now the generals have gotten rid of their president. Well, they began fighting amongst themselves. And the South Vietnamese government now, which was corrupt, has now begun to just deteriorate because these generals are fighting with each other. Then, of course, we have our own presidential assassination not long after that. Before that, President Kennedy was supportive of the Vietnam War, and the big question is, would it have continued if he hadn't been assassinated? And I can't begin to guess what exactly would have happened. But the people that were put in place, Henry Cabot Lodge on the right and Defense Secretary McNamara on the left, along with our general in Saigon. I think I was in that exact room because my guide seemed to know this whole town of Saigon. And it was a small place. And so they were in Saigon. And you'll recall McNamara was a whiz kid from president of Ford Motor Company. And before that was regarded as a great statistical analyst. And so that general leaves, and then we get William Westmoreland, who looks like a general, and he was a World War II leader and successful, who was now bringing his World War II strategies and his ideas. We say correctly that we fight our last war, and he comes to Vietnam to lead the American troops, who are now building up in numbers. So there's McNamara pointing to a map. But the big question is, when did we declare war on Vietnam? When did we do that?
Never.
Never. Because in August, an American destroyer was near Vietnam in the Tonkin Gulf, stormy weather, and a couple of patrol boats come out, and the skipper of the ship thinks at first that he was being attacked by a couple of Vietnamese patrol boats. The next day, he says, we weren't being attacked. That was waves. It was choppy water. My radar's crap. They never attacked us. But it was too late. Because based on that patrol boat attack that probably never happened, Congress granted the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. And luckily, never in any other time in history have we ever launched a war based on poor information or incorrect information. That's the only time we've ever done that, right? Okay.
The only time.
So one of the things that Westmoreland does, as he says, we've got these Vietnamese people in these villages and in these rice paddies all over South Vietnam. We can't control them, and they're being susceptible to being persuaded by the Viet Cong. So we're going to round them up and put them in strategic villages. Now, can you imagine rounding up all the farmers in Charlevoix County and Antrim County and say, we're going to send you somewhere else. You can leave your farm behind. We're going to put you somewhere else. We had 23,000 troops there. So we rounded these people up. And what happened? We really made them angry because they were away from their food supply. They were away from their villages, and they were becoming easy prey to the Viet Cong. Now, this man on the right, John Paul Van, was the leading advisor in Vietnam at that time. He had kind of a checkered history. There was a statutory rape charge on him in Germany. His home life was awful. He was awful to his wife, but he was a brilliant strategist. And he knew early on that the strategic Hamlet program was not working, that the Vietnamese army was corrupt, that enlisted men would pay their officers so they don't have to show up for work. It was not going well, and he knew it. Now, what's interesting about John Paul Van is that he tried to get the message to President Johnson, and his advisors were not going to let him do it because we've got to win this war. But John Paul Van, when he died in 1972, was given a virtual state funeral and buried at Arlington National Cemetery because all of the leaders, past and present, knew that he was the guy who knew the truth. So this is not some secret story. And the book that I read 20 years after the war, wonderful book, Bright Shining Lie. I recommend it. Talks about John Paul Van's life. Neil Sheehan wrote that book. Took him a long time to write it. And it begins with the funeral, talking about how so many American leaders respected John Paul Van. When he died, he was a civilian advisor back in Vietnam. He was supervising a skirmish between Vietnamese, North and South fighting. Airplane was shot down. He was killed. The troops he was helping stripped his clothes of all of his belongings and left them there. So now in 1965, the Marines are called in, as they are so often, to help out. So they are in Da Nang, and you can see the numbers. We're now up to 184,000. Now bear in mind, this is 65, and we already had overwhelming evidence that this strategy that we had in Vietnam was not working. Our soldiers called the Vietnamese zipperheads, gooks. We had a lot of names. We couldn't speak their language. We had no idea what their culture was. But somehow or other, amidst all that, we're going to do something. This is a famous battle. You've seen the movie, or may have. We Were Soldiers Once with Mel Gibson. Great story. It's about the first contact between the regular North Vietnamese army and American troops who had been trained to fight using helicopters. This was, I think, the first Air Cab Division. The movie's a great movie because this is the contact where American troops come into Firebase X-ray, and the North Vietnamese come out of nowhere in huge numbers and attack them. And because the colonel was a brilliant strategist, they fought them off, but they used B-52s, artillery, and a lot of other stuff to beat them in a 3-day fight. Made a great movie, but if you watch the end of the movie, it's when the Vietnamese general says, I think the Americans have learned the wrong lesson. Because the next day, after this movie is over, LZ Albany is attacked by the North Vietnamese and overrun. And Ho Chi Minh said on that day, we can beat the Americans. Because what they learned was that we had B-52s and we had artillery, but we needed space from the enemy. So the enemy said, we grab them by the belt buckle and hold them as tight as we can, and they can't use any of it. Ho Chi Minh said, we know how we're going to win. And this is 1966. Great book, and actually a great movie. So now we have protests. Protests start early. People are upset. And it's confusing because what is this all about? We're Americans. We fought in Europe. We're fighting communism in Vietnam. What are you folks doing protesting? You know, our boys are over in Vietnam. You shouldn't be doing this. Then we have people going to Canada and to avoid the draft. This is the most interesting case. Muhammad Ali, the world heavyweight champion, a brilliant man, says, why should they ask me to put on a uniform and go 10,000 miles from home and drop bombs and bullets on brown people in Vietnam, while so-called Negro people in Louisville are treated like dogs and denied simple human rights, so they'll go to jail? Well, we've been in jail for 400 years. Muhammad Ali then went to federal court and was convicted of draft dodging and stripped of his heavyweight championship title. Supreme Court eventually overturned the conviction many years later after it was okay. The draft is about white people sending black people to fight yellow people to protect the country they stole from the red people. I mean, the man is brilliant, you know? You say, well, you know, you're kind of right. He also said this, I got nothing against no Viet Cong. No Vietnamese ever called me that. This took bravery. And then when in retrospect, when you read it today, you say, holy cow. I mean, I didn't know anything about that. I hadn't read any of those books. I was going to Michigan State having a great time. Some people thought I was a hero. This is Muhammad Ali. Some said that what I did was wrong, but everything I did was according to my conscience. I wasn't trying to be a leader. I just wanted to be free. And I made a stand all people, not just black people, should have thought about making, because it wasn't just black people being drafted. The government had a system where the rich man's son went to college, the poor man's son went to war. Then after the rich man's son got out of college, he did other things to keep him out of the army until he was too old to be drafted. Muhammad Ali was a remarkable man. Then this happens. This is pretty serious. Lyndon Johnson has done great things with the Great Society, and the beneficiaries primarily are black folks. But he's got the Vietnam War. And now Dr. Spock, famous pediatrician, and Martin Luther King Jr. are protesting against the war. Martin Luther King, who had everything, he was the beneficiary of Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. And Johnson knew that to do all these things, he was going to lose the South, but he did it because he thought it was the right thing. And now he's losing Martin Luther King. So now we've got people calling the war indecent. So now the war expands. And we now have almost 500,000 troops in Vietnam. How's it going? Well, we bring in helicopters. Fortunately, I didn't go to helicopter school. I understand the lifespan of a pilot was relatively short. But we thought we had something. We had a gizmo. We had a thing. We could go in and do great stuff with the first air cav. Eventually, the Vietnamese realized those helicopters have no bullet protection and you can shoot them down. So now comes January of 1968 in the beginning of Tet. When I scheduled my trip, I arranged to get there before Tet because I didn't know how crowded it was going to be. But anyway, this was Khe Sanh. American Marines have a big runway and they've got a base, and the Vietnamese attacked them, and you can see all the stretchers. Eventually they blew up the runway and our troops were under fire for a long time. So what happens? Well, eventually we get out and the war ends and we move on. The story of Vietnam quite often is a battle that was so serious, people are killed on some hill or some valley, and then we go somewhere else. There is no, you know, when you see the article that I wrote for the Harbor Light newspaper, I begin by the words that were said to me when I first got to Vietnam. I'm at Cu Chi, 25th Division headquarters. I'm walking down a little path and this guy walks by and he says, "It don't mean nothing." And I thought, what the hell is this all about? I mean, I don't know. I'm just some guy that joins the army. Well, it turns out if you don't have a front line, if you're not making progress, if you're staying in one spot, you go out, shoot, come back, go out, shoot, and come back, it really don't mean nothing. One of the things that I could see from my company clerk office was the helicopters going to Graves registration, where I could see the feet hanging out the door with tags on them, people that were being taken, Americans and Vietnamese, to be logged and then sent home for burial. Americans. The offensive was huge and shocking. This was in Hue, and I'm going to show you some pictures of Hue later. This was an incredible battle. The fellow who wrote Black Hawk Down wrote a book about Hue. And this is another great book that I recommend, because this battle went on for weeks and there were deaths. I'm going to go back here. I think I gave you, no, I don't have the numbers here, but it was when the North Vietnamese come into Hue, the first thing they do is they round up about 2,000 Vietnamese people who've been working for the Americans and the South Vietnamese and executed them. It was a brutal battle, door to door. So now in Saigon, this famous photograph, this is a Saigon police chief. One of his officers has captured this man who's just executed a few South Vietnamese people. And the officer brings him up to the chief to say, what are we going to do with this guy? Should we put him in jail? With media around, a cameraman and a photographer were there when he blew this guy's brains out. And that picture went around the world. So now we're seeing pictures of Vietnam that are just a little different from what we remembered from World War II. So here we go. The whole Tet Offensive, U.S. and the South lost maybe 2,000. NVA and VC maybe lost 60,000. If you watch the great Ken Burns documentary about Vietnam, and I've watched it 3 times, it's brilliant. He has a Marine who says that when McNamara said, we kill 10 for every one that they kill, he said, we don't care about the 10, but we sure as hell care about the one, because he's one of us. Now, it turns out the North Vietnamese, Ho Chi Minh and General Giap didn't mind losing lots of people, because they had lots and lots of people and not much else. And it was their country. So we're now seeing pictures like this from Vietnam. And then during the Tet Offensive, something happens that is another point in the war where Walter Cronkite, because back then we only had 3 networks. We don't have this noise factory today that we have today. And that's a fault, because we all watched the same programs. Whether they were great or not, I don't know. But we watched 3, so we shared certain things. And Walter Cronkite says, to say we are closer to victory today is to believe in the face of the evidence the optimists who have been wrong in the past. To suggest we are on the edge of defeat is to yield to unreasonable pessimism. To say that we are mired in a stalemate seems the only realistic yet unsatisfactory conclusion. On the off chance that military and political analysts are right, in the next few months, we must test the enemy's intentions in case this is indeed his last big gasp before negotiations. But it's increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out will be to negotiate not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could. And Lyndon Johnson said, when we've lost Walter Cronkite, we've lost, which is correct. Then this happens. The next month, good American soldiers we think of as heroes in World War II massacre South Vietnamese women and children and rape a bunch of them. And the only reason that this was found out was because an American helicopter pilot saw something going on. He comes down, he tells his door gunner, aim your gun at these guys, and we're going to tell them, knock it off. Lieutenant Calley went to court and was tried and convicted, and he served a few days in, I think, home confinement. But everybody else did this, and they were angry. They were angry, I'm sure, because they were in a war where their friends, their buddies were being killed for something that then we would walk away from. So you could argue that this was a logical outcome of sending young men to do something that none of us could figure out. I never understood the war until I began reading the books that came out 20 years later. Then this happens. Martin Luther, 1968, and the years prior, when we condense all this, was a turbulent era. Now I'm going to show you this. This seems kind of random, but Nui Ba Den was a mountain northwest of Saigon that was used as a communications tower by Americans. We had a whole bunch of antennas up there, and I went up there once because our signal battalion, I was in the 1st Signal Brigade, operated a bunch of equipment up there. What's interesting is the top of the mountain was American, and the middle of the sides and the bottom are all Viet Cong. So we kind of had a shared arrangement here. That didn't work out so good because they eventually attacked our group, overran them, and killed about 35, and Americans killed about 35. And then we went back to operating our antennas, and the war went on. And then this happens in 1968. Robert F. Kennedy is assassinated. And if I'm not mistaken, he was opposed to the war pretty vehemently. So now President Nixon is in office because Johnson has chosen not to run for re-election. And he connects with President Tu, who is the new president of South Vietnam. His number 2 is Nguyen Cao Ky, who I think lives in Virginia or did for a while. But President Tu promised that the South would be free and free of communists. So Nixon was, I guess, glad to meet with him and promise some sort of support in a war that had been a quagmire. So then Melvin Laird is the defense secretary. Robert McNamara is retired, and now Melvin Laird, and you can see what he's talking about here is the Americans getting out of Vietnam. We have to find, Lyndon Johnson said, I do not want to be the first president to lose a war. So Melvin Laird has a plan for us to tiptoe out of Vietnam and turn over the war to the Vietnamese people. So at this time, we've got 500,000 people in Vietnam. And if you can see the cultural difference between us and them, this is a young American draftee with a machine gun and a bunch of women and their children in their place. We don't share their language, their culture, and we're going to go home someday if we're alive. Now, March 1969, President Nixon decides to bomb Cambodia. So it's a covert bombing campaign, doesn't want to admit that we're in Cambodia, but in fact, because the Ho Chi Minh Trail was in Cambodia, we want to bomb that to break it up. In June 69, Life magazine and one issue published the pictures of every American who had died in a 1-week period prior to that publication. It shocked Americans to see these boys and a few girls who had died in Vietnam in a war that we still could not figure out. Did I miss anything? No. Okay, so this guy comes. I'm drafted in 68, or not drafted, I enlisted in 68, know nothing about Vietnam. Go to Vietnam, and with my typing skills that I learned in Su Hai, and you can see me on the right in that Jeep with 3 other fierce soldiers out there doing who knows what. This is where we stayed. This is where I was. This is the 25th Division headquarters, and in the front is the 1st Signal Brigade. You could actually pick up a phone and dial a number, and we had dial telephones in Vietnam. My college roommate joined the Army, was drafted, and came in 2 months after me. And he comes to this massive division headquarters, picks up a phone and says to whoever answers the phone, hey, do you know where Charlie McInnis is? 25th Division headquarters. The guy says, yeah, he's standing right behind me. So, because I was the dial telephone exchange. This is where we operated. And we had switchboard operators, and we had pole climbers, and we operated a phone system. We had microwave for long line communication. We could dial all over Vietnam, and that's where I worked as a clerk at first. I also bought my first camera, and this is my first selfie. I'm getting my picture taking my own picture while this Vietnamese man is cutting my hair on our 25th Division base because we hired Vietnamese to work there. So I'm proud of my very first selfie before they were in style. Carried that camera throughout the entire war. My camera was my own. It wasn't the Army's camera, it was mine. And there was a 25th Division photo lab that I could go in to develop pictures. And I could send them off to Kodak. They would go to Japan where they would be developed, and you'd get your film back in a week. It was just remarkable. These are the kinds of photographs I took. On the left is an American colonel meeting with a Vietnamese colonel who he's turned equipment over to. And on the right is an American soldier teaching a couple of Vietnamese fellows how to operate the phone equipment in Vietnam. So what I did was take pictures and write stories for Army publications about this turnover of American equipment. This is the 25th Division headquarters as seen from a helicopter. I had a lot of opportunities to ride in helicopters, but never while anybody was being shot at. But you can see it as seen from next to, because they wouldn't close the door. I just hang out the door and take aerial photographs. I thought it was quite, the beauty of being in a helicopter is that you're up in the air, it's cooler, it's drier, and there are no mosquitoes. That's what I remember about helicopters. This is a photo I took. Is this Wisconsin, land of lakes? No, actually, it's in it's not too far from Cu Chi, and it's an agricultural area that's been carpet bombed by a B-52. Now, what's interesting, not only is the land been wrecked, not every bomb explodes. You know, we're still finding bombs, or the Europeans are, in Germany and England from World War II. So you look at all that, you hope that every crater is from a bomb that exploded, but those that didn't, maybe they didn't make a crater and they're out there. This is the gift that keeps on giving. This is part of our division headquarters. You can see all these bunkers along here. You know, Army bases in places like this are just ugly. This looks out to the perimeter. The tree line, we would clear cut that so that we have a line of fire. So if the Vietnamese attempt to overrun us as they did in Tet the previous year, we can catch them before they get too close. And this is some really tough American soldiers. These are my buddies in the Signal Corps. One guy's reading the newspaper, one guy's next to a machine gun he's never fired, and the other two look really fierce because every third day we had to do perimeter guard. We were and the netting, the wire there is so if somebody throws a grenade, it may hit the netting first and then keep it from exploding where we are. This is where I lived. It's these huts, not Quonset huts, but these huts are surrounded by sandbags, and inside you'd have your bed and you'd have a foot locker, which a lock on it, because if you didn't lock it, everything you had inside that was worth anything would be stolen by your fellow soldiers, and you'd have a fan. When I went over there, I bought a fan for $18, and when I left, I sold it for $15, even though one of the blades had broken off, and I had a nail to use as a counter to a weight to make up for the lost weight from the fan, but it was still worth $15. Now, this one I'm especially proud of because Bob Hope came to Vietnam to entertain the troops. So I went there at Christmas, whenever it was, must have been Christmas, to see Bob Hope. Now, what's really interesting is that although it's not true everywhere, but it was true at this one place, Bob Hope came to our headquarters to make a TV show for America about how he went to Vietnam to entertain the troops. Why do I say that? Because that's my view of Bob Hope and Joey Heatherton at this place. Can you see Bob Hope anywhere? He's somewhere in there. Mostly you see the butts of the American cameramen who are there to make a TV show about how Bob Hope was entertaining us. What we did though, we had other entertainment because Filipino bands would be brought over to come to the enlisted men's club to perform for us. And so that was one night in the enlisted men's club. Now, we also could go to Saigon and we would be entertained by bar girls because we turned the economy upside down in Vietnam. The bar girls made a lot of money off of Americans. their parents, I'm not sure where they were, but their grandfathers were hired to work on the base camp. This is the most disgusting part of the program. You know, you need all of the facilities. So we have an outhouse. It's up kind of high. You sit where there's a hole, and there's the bottom third of a 55-gallon drum underneath it. If you're the first person to use that barrel, it makes kind of a boom, you know, and but then after it's full, Papa San would drag that out, fill it with diesel fuel, and set it on fire.
Still smell
I'm sorry?
it. I still smell
Thank you, Steve. Yes. But what happened? So we've changed the culture of Vietnam, and I took pictures wherever I went. And so this is what I'm showing you. But the result of this is kind of important, because the result is this. This young man, I never knew his name. I took his picture holding a M16. He appears to be half Vietnamese and half African American. I can guarantee that he would never be allowed to go to school. He would never learn a skill. His mom would be poverty stricken. His life would be pretty much awful. That's another one of our contributions to Vietnam. Beautiful child. This is me. You can see how fierce I am, because if you look at my M16, the magazine's upside down. That's so I don't hurt anybody. And I'm talking to these two nuns. I have no idea what we're doing there. But since somebody mentioned about a relative being a dentist, we did try to be kind and caring, because we showed the kids how to brush your teeth. And then we also did dental work. I had 2 wisdom teeth taken out at my base camp. The American dentist, a young guy, had not done this too much before, because he was really working at it. But he had a Vietnamese assistant who had long hair, and there was no air conditioning, but the fan blew her hair into my mouth while I was getting my wisdom teeth taken out. It's one of those things you just kind of remember, you know? So here we are helping Vietnamese people. You know, we do, well, anyway, there we are. These are some of the beautiful people that were on our base camp. The young lady on the left would shine American soldiers' shoes during the day. You could leave it, you always had 2 pairs of shoes, boots, and she would shine one while you're wearing the other. Then you would switch the next day. Young lady at the left, on the right, worked at the PX. Young lady on the left worked at the PX, and Mama San over there with pretty significant, I presume, osteoporosis is working there. This is Saigon. It's an impoverished city. It's packed with people. For some reason, I was in Saigon a couple times, and I just took pictures. You can see people in these little carts. There's a little jitney cart on the left, and then a cyclo on the right. And you can tell by the smoke in the back, it's 2-cycle. The place just smelled. My wife and I, when we got married, we went to New York City on our honeymoon, and it smelled like Saigon. And I got off the plane and I said, this was not a good idea. Here's a little gas station. Some guys working on a car. I don't know what they're doing, but you can get a sense of the sophistication there. This is a man in his cyclo with the little 2-cycle bike, and you can see what happens when there's a firefight.
When was this, Charlie?
This would have been in 69 or 70. This is when I was there. I was just taking random photographs. This, of course, you can always find fresh meat. It's really fresh on the left, and it's been prepared for your purchase on the right. And you can go in this market, and of course, you can see all this fresh meat and the flies that go with it, and the little children running everywhere. There's just little kids everywhere. I mean, we're in a city with people, and there's a war going on somewhere, but not on this particular block today. These are some of the people that we were, I guess, defending. I believe it's a father and his daughter and their horses. I don't remember where I was, but these are just people. Mama San, and then there's the little bar. They had a big boy in Saigon. You can see the soldiers riding their Honda 2-cycle bikes. My tour guide recognized the model and told me what year it was made. And but they ride those Hondas, but they're all 2-cycle. I think they've got an 80cc engine. You can see that in the aerial or a vertical shot on the right there, you can see all the garbage that's been.
So people were friendly to you. 'Cause you were-
Yeah, they were fine. Yeah, well, we didn't speak the language. We had no idea.
They were kind to you.
That's right. As far as we knew. I will show you some other pictures, but you get out into the field and you see what they did to soldiers, and you see all of the booby traps, all the things they did, but they were soldiers trying to defend their country. But we're wandering around in Saigon. Now, I will say that I was in one of those sick-lows just like that, and I took out my wallet to pay the guy. Two other guys on a motorbike come by, grab that wallet, and whoosh, they're gone. So, you know, there was not a close working relationship with these guys.
Well, you can't tell the good guys from the bad guys.
Well, it's hard to tell the good guys from bad guys if there's no front, if we don't know why we're there, if we can't. Well, there's so many. There's so much. The phrase "fog of war" is so accurate. But well, I'm going to show you some more. You can see the people on the right. That picture is interesting because you're going to see another version of it in a few minutes. SO sells gas over there. People riding two of them on a bike. Actually, today they can now ride 3 on a bike. I think I've seen 4. And of course, we have our helicopters based at our base camp. Dust-off helicopters. That's one of the most dangerous jobs in the war. We had 2 hospitals on our base camp. On the left are soldiers on patrol with their dogs. I've done this program a number of times, and in Petoskey at the college went to this. One man said, I was one of those guys with the dog, and he said when we came back, the dog was considered equipment and we had to leave it behind. And he said it really bothered him. On the right, you can see one of the colonels I worked for. He's doing something. I'm taking his picture. Who knows what he's doing? This is Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base, the entry to it. People are going in and out all the time. So then the lottery comes along in 1969, but I'm already there. So I just put in parentheses number 19. I'd already won the lottery. I'd been there. What a deal. So now we send ground troops into Cambodia in 1970. And this picture is interesting to me because the guy in the white shirt is my college roommate. And he's in artillery, and he's in Cambodia. For me, the rest of the story for him is that he got in 2 months after me. I got out 2 months before he got out because, you know, we both were in a short time, but I got out earlier. So he was married and I'd been to his wedding. I'd met his wife and his family. And so he asked me, would you go to East Lansing and see my parents and see my wife and tell them I'll be okay? And of course, this is where he is. But I go there. I remember this day really well. I'm at the front porch at 820 Collingwood in East Lansing to tell them I'm his roommate and I'm here to tell you he's going to be okay. The real news in that story is that his wife wasn't his sister. His wife's younger and much prettier sister was not dating anybody. And we've been married 54 years. So my roommate and I became brothers-in-law. He sent me this picture recently because he'd had it. But anyway, they were in Cambodia. That's important because college students were not happy about the war and Cambodia. And there were protests all over the country. But this one in particular, where the National Guard is sent in, young National Guard soldiers, not trained on what to do with a college campus protest. And so what do we know happened as a result of that? They opened fire on these college students protesting the war, and that went around the world. Kent State still marks that day, I think, every year. So these are the young people, young Americans, that young Americans killed for protesting, for expressing themselves, their opposition to a war that, to quote the fellow that I met, don't mean nothing. So this happens. You'll remember the Pentagon Papers. The defense secretary had commissioned some people to keep a secret log, a history of the war for academic research later on, but Daniel Ellsberg finds out about it and arranges to have it published. And now the whole world can see the truth about the war. This went to the Supreme Court. And if I'm not mistaken, a member of Congress was able to read into the record the words from this to make it public. But that was a huge thing, to take a secret document and publicize it, and the Pentagon Papers. Then this happens in 1972. Now the Vietnamese are essentially doing the war themselves. And a South Vietnamese pilot napalms a South Vietnamese village by mistake. And this young lady is now napalmed and naked. And there was a big debate at the Associated Press in Saigon. Should we publish this? And the editor said, yes. And it went all over the world. And she lives in Canada. And she said, I forgive the Americans. But the war is continuing. So now the Vietnamese are fighting amongst themselves. And there's a huge battle of An Loc in April 1972 until June, where the Vietnamese are just killing each other in massive numbers. And then this happens. Jane Fonda, who was a pinup girl for a lot of American soldiers, I think the movie was Clute that she was famous for. She goes to Hanoi and it shocks everyone. But it is another example of the turmoil in that long era that began in I forget the year, but with the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. We begin our retreat. Henry Kissinger is negotiating with the North Vietnamese. It took him, I think, months to decide the shape of the table. And President Nixon wants to help things along. They free the Americans from the Hanoi Hilton built by the French. And this is that famous homecoming picture. The rest of the story is that officer and his wife in the back divorced not too long afterwards. I don't know how marriages could possibly survive on that time. He comes back a different person. She's a different person. Joy everywhere here, but this is a complex world. I just threw this in. This has got nothing to do with Vietnam, but it's just fun to look at. Spiro Agnew, the nattering nabobs of negativism. And goodbye, Spiro. So the war continues. We've got the Paris Peace Accords. We're mostly done, mostly gone. And of course, the fall of Saigon happens in April of 1975 when the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese attack throughout the country and overrun the palace in Saigon and take over. And then the flight, you'll recall, begins of all the people who helped us. If I'm not mistaken, in Armed Forces Vietnam radio, the code was to play Bing Crosby, I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas. When you heard that on the radio, it meant, get the hell out of town. So we've got the Marines, they had to chop a tree down. The ambassador said, I'm not chopping that tree down. Marines couldn't get a helicopter in until they chopped it down. So they did. The Americans got out. Vietnamese escaped in helicopters that came to the aircraft carrier, and they had to be dumped over because they had to make room for more people. It was a horrifying time. This was not the embassy. It was another building. Vietnamese trying to get out of their own country because they'd helped the Americans and they knew what was in store for them. Now, this picture, of course, you recall the boat people who left Vietnam. But if you ever go to the Thai Orchid in Petoskey, it's owned by Mr. Thomas Van Yee, who was a Hmong, and he got out at the same time because his father had worked for the Royal Cambodia, Royal Thai Air Force, and they got on the last plane. They fled their village and got on an airplane and got out, went to Thailand, and then came to the U.S., and Mr. Van Yee and his family are in Petoskey. I've had him give talks twice at the college. He's just a nice man, but he would have been dead if he had not been out. So here are the statistics. We lost, of course, 58,000, wounded many more, some missing, some POWs. We don't know, nobody knows how many Vietnamese were killed, but it was millions. So the question becomes, when did the killing stop? Because the war ended in 1975, and the answer is, it has not. Why is that? Because we dropped more bombs in that little country than we ever did in World War II. More American bombs. And they're still exploding. So they count 42,000 dead, and there's more to come. This is a picture that I took in Hanoi in January. You may have heard of Operation Linebacker too in December of 1972, when waves of American B-52s came over there. 15 of them were shot down. This is a man who shot down some of those American B-52s using Russian or Chinese radar-guided anti-aircraft artillery. And there's a nice little pond in the middle of Hanoi with the upside-down landing gear of a B-52 sitting there. Where there's a little plaque that says, "This, we did this." Unexploded ordnance. 15% of the country is covered with this stuff. And I showed you this picture. Here it is again. Now that you think about the unexploded ordnance, that's where it is. So how are you going to grow crops there? The napalm that we used was regarded as very effective, and we did 10 times more napalm in Vietnam than we did in Korea. But here's the real crime, of course. We all know about Agent Orange. It gets its name because the barrel has an orange insignia on it. It's made up of two primary compounds. One's called 2,4-D, which we use to kill dandelions. I used to sell it at my dad's feed elevator in Sault Ste. Marie. And it has 2,4,5-T, which is a brush killer. It also has other contaminants, which are problematic. But we dropped millions of gallons of that. We had two purposes. One purpose was to defoliate the Ho Chi Minh Trail so we could see the Vietnamese going down the trail. But the other one was to kill the crops, to starve the people. As my tour guide in Hanoi said, the North Vietnamese soldiers did not enlist to support communism. They enlisted because they were hungry, because they had been denied the ability to raise their own crops. And so they joined the army to feed themselves and their families. Operation Ranch Hand. So an estimated 400,000 died, Vietnamese, 500,000 birth defects, Vietnamese. This is in Hanoi, a little sheltered workshop that makes these works of art. Young lady on the right, I'm told, has birth defects from Agent Orange and works there. But the important thing, the other important thing is American soldiers were also exposed to it in massive amounts. And it's estimated 300,000 Americans have died. Now, I was chatting with a young man the other day who was in the Army Airborne, and I was talking with him just a little bit, and he said, yeah, he spent a year next to a burn pit, which I presume was in Afghanistan or Iraq. And of course, the 9/11 people are suffering from the dust. So people who serve in the military or as first responders quite often suffer for the rest of their lives. I've served on the Emmett County board with a wonderful young man, major disability and serious PTSD. He had 2 inhalers from burn pits. And of course, when you go to the VA, you immediately are told this: if you have a health condition caused by Agent Orange, you may be eligible for VA disability compensation. Many people, not only do they have disability compensation, they have 100% disability. Now, these two things are very important to me. The bottom one is just the Vietnam Service Medal. One of the many things the military does right is they give you all these ribbons, because you can see another soldier, if he's wearing his, what they call the fruit salad, you can, if you see him from across the room, you can tell who that guy is, where he was, what he did. And you don't have to, as you know, you and I, we meet somebody, we tell them our life story. Soldiers don't have to do that. And when you see that Vietnam Service Medal, that means they served in Vietnam. But more important, at the top of that fruit salad is the most important award. That's the Combat Infantry Badge. That means he could have been killed. And a lot of his friends probably were, but that one always goes to the top. You can see all of this stuff. The very top is the Combat Infantry Badge. There's also the Combat Action Badge, which is a more recent one, and I think it's for different branches. I don't know anything about it, but if you see this, what's called the CIB, that's a big deal. When some soldiers from Iraq came to the college over in Petoskey, I would see some of them wearing their backpacks, and one guy had the Combat Action Badge on his backpack. And I said, does anybody ask you what that is? And he says, no. And I said, is that what I think it is? And he said, yes. When you see that, that's somebody who served. I served because, frankly, I was like every other dumbass 21-year-old, but no hero. So where's Vietnam today? Well, on the left is shift change at a factory. And you can see these people coming out. We still have mopeds, but they're 4-cycle. On the right is tourist vans going to go to the Cu Chi tunnels. Millions of people come to Vietnam. Tourism is very important to the Vietnamese. They welcome us. Why? I don't know. President Obama came there in 2016, and Anthony Bourdain had lunch with him at a restaurant in Hanoi. It was part of the demonstration that Vietnam is a place that we should consider going to for the people that we were fighting. You can see two people on their little motorbike. This is in Hanoi. Then you can see the little, I think it's a Chinese Jeep people are driving around in Hanoi. Very safe place. Just don't eat all of the food there. On the left is a sweatshop. It's at night. And so when there's discussion about bringing manufacturing back to the United States, this is manufacturing in Vietnam. And on the right, lady from Traverse City and her boyfriend are having dinner in the evening in Hanoi at a little outdoor cafe. That's what I ate when I was at the Mekong Delta in a private home. You picked up my phone and took a picture of that. This is a nice hotel in Saigon today. So when I toured, I went to Hanoi, Hue, Nui Ba Dinh, Cu Chi Tunnels, War Remnants Museum, and the Mekong Delta. I'm going to show you all that in just a minute. This is going to go quickly. This is the first day I'm in Hanoi. My guide takes me to the mausoleum where Ho Chi Minh is. I have to turn in my camera. I saw Ho Chi Minh. I saw the body of Ho Chi Minh. He's revered there. They send him back to Russia once a year for restoration. But the interesting thing is that all these Vietnamese kids ran up to me. They wanted to touch a Westerner, not just an American, but a Westerner. I mean, we're bigger. And look at these children. I mean, and they're happy to see me there. And they wanted to get their picture taken or willing to get their picture taken. You can go into the gift shop and you can buy the kind of shoes they wore when they were hauling armament down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Got made out of car tires, and I didn't buy any. You can go to the war. You can go to the Hanoi Hilton. It's hard to get a good picture, but you can see the picture of the first American officer who was shot down and captured in Hanoi and remained there for the duration of the war. And this is another picture of the diorama that they made inside there to show how the French had incarcerated and tortured the Vietnamese. The surface they're on is inclined, so when you lie down, your head is below your feet, and it's uncomfortable as hell. So there's stuff going on everywhere in Vietnam, but you can go to this place and it's on the side of the road, and there it is. These are pictures done by Vietnamese of the war, which they remember quite well. Now, you can, of course, just like that outdoor market I showed you when I was there the first time, same deal. You can go and get some fresh beef, no refrigeration that I can find anywhere. But if you're careful, you can go to the place on the right if your guide says it's okay, and you can have a nice meal. Lots and lots of that stuff. Now, because I was a utility employee, I had to take a picture of these two utility guys And then the wiring. Now, I don't know what that is. I don't know what it connects to. I think they could rethink that. I just wanted to show you that. This is Hanoi, people on their bikes. All right, now in this picture, when I started, I want to show you how you cross the street. Okay, watch for the two people in black on the right. Very simple process. Okay, the two people on the right. Here's how you cross the street. You just cross the street and you don't want to make eye contact with anybody and you don't stop. You just keep going. This is Hanoi at night. This is Hue, Citadel. This is a monastery where we've got monks, beautiful facilities here. This is the car that the monk was driven into Saigon, where he was immolated. On the right's a monk just going about his business. They repainted the car, but you can still see it there. You can also buy a Good Morning Vietnam t-shirt. People go there to get their picture taken. And so these beautiful people, look at that little girl on the left. Have you ever seen anybody as pretty as that? That little child. So these young ladies, I don't know what the reason is, but they go there to get their picture taken. So I have no idea what's going on, but they're just smiling. They're beautiful people. Or you can go to Khe Sanh, which was a major battle involving the Marines, and there's a nice little coffee shop there now. You can see the stuff we left behind. You can see the building. You can see the lookout tower. You can see the helicopter. You can see the airplane that wasn't able to take off after it landed. A couple of tanks. People like to sit on them. You can see some leftover arms that were dropped. Now, I showed you Nui Ba Den. The reason I showed you Nui Ba Den, it was a pretty invisible part of the war. But now, you take a cable car and you go to the top. No VC in the bushes anymore, as the man said at the beginning. You get in the cable car and you go to the top, and you can see Lady Buddha at the top. I have no idea what this is all about. But people go there to get their picture taken. It's a beautiful place. Now, if you go to Cu Chi, which is this place, which is not far from where I was, this friendly tour guide will show you where the Vietnamese were. And this is where we get into the element where the tunnels, now this little girl can get in and out. It's a little bit too small for me because the reality is the Vietnamese are smaller than the Americans and they could build tunnels that they can get into and get out of, except for a few guys called tunnel rats who actually go in there. But you can see the young man on the left. See how he's lifting up a little top there? So when he puts it down, leaves are around there, it's invisible, but he can pop up at the right time. People lived for years in these tunnels. And we now come by the millions. This is the War Remnants Museum in Saigon. I think these things were abandoned by the South Vietnamese because they're in pretty good shape. The tank, the helicopter. You can get your picture taken next to an abandoned American jet, which is just great. The bomb on the left is called a daisy cutter. It's a 10,000 pound bomb. They dropped from a big bomber to blast such a big crater that you can bring in helicopters and use it as a big landing base. We left a lot of that behind, as I said. And of course, you can see in this War Remnants Museum, the displays about My Lai. Now, I showed you those earlier pictures of people in Vietnam. This is Saigon. They do have street lights some places. I have a bunch of pictures, which I'm not showing, that have as many as 4 people, mom, dad, and a couple kids on that motorbike. Their standard of living is 1/5 of ours. That's why they can export stuff so inexpensively. And of course, it's, the country, which was, I think, 20 million people after World War II, is 100 million people now. It is a crowded country. They make shoes, they make $142 billion to us. This sustains them. It was when I forget which, I think it was, I forget which one, ended the trade embargo, their economy exploded. Textiles, electronics, footwear, machinery, major exporter. And when we buy something from Vietnam, if you buy a t-shirt that says from Vietnam on it or anything else, personally, when I see that, I say, I am buying this knowing that I am supporting an economy that we did things to that I am not very proud of. This is where I stayed in Hue. 22 million people come each year, and you can see it's a major business. They treat us incredibly well. I asked her if she would speak. I had my camera, and you push the red button and you have a video. And so she went back, changed her clothes, because you would have seen her in the very first picture. She wanted to put on something nice. My guide said, I will translate that and send you a translation, but he never did. I found a website, AI, uploaded it. It translated it into written Vietnamese, pushed the button, and it translated it into English. I'm Vietnamese. My name is Ten. I live in Ben Tre. I've been working in this travel profession for quite a long time, so I would like to have a lot of Americans come to my native Vietnam, especially Ben Tre in the west of the Mekong River. People are very gentle, cute, hospitable. My wish to be welcomed is that many Americans come to my hometown of Ben Tre. I appreciate your gratitude. Unbelievable. I was going to say something else about that. Now I can't remember. This is my last night in Saigon, but I was sitting at the top of a hotel. They had a saltwater pool at the top. I knew I was going home the next day. Oh, I forgot to bring it. I have a $10 bill. So I had to fill out the forms in advance. And one of them is a visa. I've never done this before. So I typed the information in to get a visa to Vietnam. And I get it back in a few days. But I made a mistake. The date that I picked was the date before my plane left. So we go to the airport in Saigon, and the customs guy says, you have overstayed your visa. So my guide, who's a great man, talks to him in Vietnamese, and they agree that I need to pay a fine. And they agree that I will pay $50 American. And so I had 320s in my wallet, so I hand them to the man. He pulls a $10 bill out of his pocket and hands it to me. And I haven't shown it off because I don't want to say they're corrupt. But their standard of living is 1/5 of ours. I'm a rich American. Frankly, I'm fine with it. I forgot to bring the 10. I've got it sitting in my dresser. I just leave it out. It's kind of crisp. He apparently just gotten it. So anyway, but I want to end with this. Because if you'll recall, a young lady at Yale University architecture student, Maya Lin, who competed with, I don't know, 1,000 or 2,000 others about how to create a memorial for the Vietnam War. And that has become a powerful emblem because all it is names. These 58,000 didn't go away. They didn't get a deferment. They went. And they came back having made the ultimate sacrifice. So I've only been there once. It's quiet, but that's the end. Thank you for coming tonight.
Now it's the third most visited place on earth.
Really?
Yes, and it ranks in the top 20 economies. It's one of the standards for, hey, Americans, come and level us like you did in Korea, build a new economy, look how good we're looking, and look at Vietnam.
Thank you for that. When I was at my hotel in Saigon, I said to the young guy, because there's no 7-Elevens or Walgreens anywhere, they're just stuff. And so I said to this guy, I just want to get a candy bar because I've been eating Vietnamese food and I want to get something that I recognize. And I said, where can I go? Because the roads all look like the ones I just showed you. And he said, well, don't go here because it's kind of sketchy. Go over there. And I said, sketchy? You talk like an American. I said, where did you learn English? He said, the Disney Channel and Comedy Central. By the way, if you ever go to the ice arena in Petoskey run by Fedorov, if you ask him where he learned English, it's the same thing. He watched cartoons, the Cartoon Network. And I said Comedy Central. I meant to say Cartoon Network and Disney. Go ahead. What else were you going to say?
I'm sorry, what?
Were you saying something? Did you have something else you're getting ready to say?
I was going to ask why we have so many Vietnamese nail places in the United States. Every American city has at least one nail. Charlevoix has two. They're Vietnamese. They don't plan to live here. They have a successful business. While they're here, their children go to the public schools and they're very successful. Bilingual. But it's like we're infiltrated by Vietnamese.
We infiltrated them first. But I understand. You want to say something, Steve? Okay. Anybody else have a comment that was in Vietnam or anything like that? That's the program tonight. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed doing this. It was an eye-opener. Are there lessons to be learned? Well, we don't learn our lessons very well. We'll probably have to learn them all over again. But anyway, thanks for coming. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. It's very enlightening for me and I lived through all of it from a very different perspective. Very much appreciated. I thank you all for coming tonight. This program and a lot of what we do for lifelong learning are sponsored by an effort of the Friends of the Library, the Charlevoix Library, and they work to fund and do things that can't be done within the budget of the library. And if you'd like to help with that through a membership or a donation to the Friends of the Library, there's an envelope here that you can take a look at and learn how to do that. But thank you so much for coming, and we'll continue to try and bring in very interesting programs. They won't measure up to this, but thank you so much. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
It was a lot of fun, you know.